everyone. It's Winnie Show here for another Sunday recap. What I talk about, what I learned in church today, in hopes that you learn something too. We're going through 1 Corinthians. We went through 1 Corinthians, 2nd chapter, verses 10 through 16, and we'll kind of break that down as I go through that. What we're talking about now, the pastor, our church has 3 campuses, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Strawbridge, or Lynn Haven and Strawbridge. And then today, the pastor from Norfolk was there. So it was the first time hearing him talk, so it was kind of cool. But yeah, let's get into what he talked about. So he gave a story about visiting his brother and his brother-in-law, and they have this obnoxious dog, and he's like big and energetic, and just so it's not his vibe, right? And he would make these like kind of snide comments out loud about the dog, just kind of in a joking manner, because he was uncomfortable with the situation. So it was his way to cope with it. But it wasn't until later when he was sitting at lunch with his brother that his brother sat down and kind of told him like, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but when you say these comments, it kind of hurts us because our dog's like our family member, which I know a lot of you guys can relate to that have pets. And he was like, I didn't know that. Like, thank you for telling me. And honestly, that's how conflict resolution should happen, right? If you have a problem with someone, you should be able to tell them, and they can be receptive, so that way they can fix it. It doesn't always go like that way, but that's the way it should go. So the point of that is, you can't know what someone's feeling or what they're thinking exactly unless they express it. Sometimes we might, get a visual cue or something, but then we might just think, well, maybe it's just in my head. So it isn't until we communicate those things that we actually understand what's going on. So it's true for relationships, but it's also true in our spiritual life, and that's what the sermon was about. So how does that apply spiritually? So let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Give me a second while I flip over there. All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, starting in verse 10, says, "These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except for the spirit of that person, which is in him? So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except for the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand the things freely given to us by God." So let's unpack that a little bit. So we heard 2 comparisons there, the spirit of the world versus the Spirit of God. So what is this spirit of the world? So a general definition of that would be the overall culture, the overall habits of the world outside of God. When the Bible or Scripture speaks of being in the world, it's talking about that system that is adopted by culture that is typically opposite of God. And then of course the Spirit of God being the things that come from God and the system that He has set up for how we should live life, how we should go about things, stuff like that. And there's a parallel. There's a parallel difference between the two, between wisdom of the world, that's human culture, and the wisdom of God. And one of the things he talked about is like, you can just look at the 3 top things, right? He said money, sex, and power. 3 things that people look to achieve, or that drive us. If you look at the world's view of that and God's view of that, they are in stark contrast, right? When it comes to money, the world says, make as much as you can, keep as much as you can, take care of you, right? And do whatever you can to get it, right? God says, give as much as you can, and use it to the best, be good stewards of it, use it to the best you can, And it's just opposite. It's opposite thought process. Give first instead of take first. Also, when it comes to sex and our bodies, the world says, you do whatever is good for you. And it's gotten so crazy that whatever you think is true, which we know is not really true, but whatever, we won't go down that road. Whereas God says that he created us for a purpose. He created sex for a purpose. And he gave clear definitions of man and woman and what our job is, and we adhere to that as Christians. And then when it comes to power, again, the world's wisdom says, seek power, take power, exhort, or I want to say exalt, kind of exalt that power, where God says, if you're in a position of power, be humble, become a servant. He says, the least of you will be the greatest. Like God's wisdom turns the whole world up on end. And actually, last Sunday we talked about this, and I don't think I recorded that one yet. I need to do that still. But one of our other campus pastors talked about how God flips wisdom and foolishness around, right? What the world thinks is foolish, God calls wisdom, and what God calls wisdom, the world calls is foolish. And some of these concepts go in there, like, giving away your money first before instead of keeping it all. That can be foolish to the world. But God says there's wisdom in that because there's spiritual principles behind that. Yeah, so Paul addresses this, and as you go through the rest of Corinthians, he is approaching a lot of things. Like, he's pretty much laying it down to Corinthian church. They have a lot of things going on that they kind of need to reevaluate how they're approaching and thinking. Goes over religious factions, sexual morality, lawsuits, marriage, singleness, a whole bunch of things, which I'm pretty sure as we go through this series, we're going to unpack those different things more and more. But the important thing is what the Spirit of God reveals to us. So 1 Corinthians 2:9 through 10, we learned that the Spirit of God reveals to us salvation. This is why we can be having a talk with like maybe a non-Christian friend, and if you got God's Spirit, like, you see things in a whole new light. You understand things differently. And sometimes when we've been doing this walk for a while, we kind of forget where we came from, about the questions we had or the things we didn't realize till we got more mature in our faith when the Spirit revealed these things to us. Because that's the other thing the Spirit does. It actually reveals the wisdom in Scripture. Because without God's Spirit, you can read the whole Bible and you won't get it until you have God's Spirit to understand it. So it's kind of, when we're talking to people, we kind of forget sometimes, and we're like, why don't you just get it? How can you not see this? And it has to do with God's Spirit teaching us these things. 1 Corinthians 14 through 16. 14, the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly or foolishness to him. And he's not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. So going by what I said, like, these things can be only learned through God's Spirit. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself to be judged by no one. For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? Meaning, none of us can comprehend God's mind at all. He's God. Like, the only thing we can know about God is what he reveals to us, which he's revealed a lot through creation, through Scripture, through his nature, through how he created us. But we can never fully understand him. So, but who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. So when we have Christ in us, that's what it means. We take on the mind of Christ through God's Spirit, and that drives who we are, what we do, what we believe, and all those things, which, and many times, almost all the time, is opposite of what the world is teaching us. So that was what we learned this Sunday. I hope I kept this short and sweet. I hope you learned something. I hope I didn't stutter over my words or say or like too much. My mom caught that one. I'm working on it, Mom. I'm working on it. All right, guys, thanks for watching this. If you spent this, I'm gonna guess maybe 7 minutes or so. I'm trying to stay under 10. Thank you again. Love you guys. Take care. Peace.